So I want you to imagine, just for a moment, that you're running this sprawling, really high-stakes organization.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Right. And over the last 10 years or so, the baseline cost of simply keeping your doors open, I mean, just covering the absolute bare minimum of your operational expenses has surged by like 41%.
Oh, wow. That's a massive jump.
It's huge. But here's the real kicker. The product you're actually selling. It doesn't generate nearly enough revenue to cover those soaring costs.
Not even close, I'm guessing.
Not even close. So to prevent the whole enterprise from just, completely collapsing, you rely on this one highly precarious strategy.
Which is?
You continually ask your own customers who, by the way, are already paying you a premium for an entirely different service to involuntarily fund your operating deficit.
I mean, that is just, it's a financial house of cards.
Exactly.
If you presented that business model to, like, literally any corporate board, they would tell you that you're sitting on a massive ticking time bomb.
Right, because eventually people just push back.
Yeah, there is a hard ceiling on how much you can tax a captive audience before they simply walk away.
And that is the perfect way to frame it, because we aren't talking about some hypothetical tech startup here.
No, we're definitely not.
We are talking about the very real, very broken economic engine that drives small college athletic departments all across the country.
It's a brutal reality for a lot of these schools.
But today, we're going to look at what happens when that ticking clock is suddenly stopped by basically a massive legislative windfall.
A total game changer.
Exactly. We're taking a deep dive into this unprecedented financial transformation that is currently unfolding right now in North Carolina.
Specifically looking at Winston-Salem State University, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
WSSU.
Yeah.
We're looking at how they are leveraging millions of dollars in newly legalized sports betting revenue to completely rewrite their athletic department's bottom line.
Which is just fascinating to watch happen in real time.
It really is. So our mission today isn't just to, stare at a spreadsheet. We want to understand how this sudden influx of tax money is fundamentally altering the student experience, the university's competitive future, and, just the very business of college sports itself.
Right, because to really grasp the magnitude of this shift at WSSU, we first have to understand the systemic financial crater that smaller Division II universities have been trapped in for years.
Yeah, lay that out for us because it's not pretty.
It's really not. The baseline economic reality of college athletics, outside of those massive television markets, is incredibly grim.
Because they don't have those mega TV deals.
Exactly. If we look at the NCAA's 2024 Revenue and Expense Report, the data paints a pretty brutal picture of what it actually costs to maintain a competitive program today.
Let's hear the numbers.
So for a Division II school that sponsors a football program, the median total expenses sit at over $9.21 million annually.
Wait, over $9 million?
Yeah, every single year.
That is a staggering operational cost, especially for institutions that are often serving, much smaller regional populations.
Right. But the expenses only tell half the story.
Oh, sure. The revenue side.
The real crisis reveals itself when you look at the incoming cash flow. I'm looking at the generated revenue side of that same NCAA report. And the median generated revenue, meaning, the actual money the athletics department earns through ticket sales, sponsorships, merch.
The stuff they actually sell.
Right. That number is only about $1.19 million.
Okay, let's unpack this. So they're spending over $9 million. But only making a little over $1 million.
Which leaves what the NCAA dryly refers to as a negative net revenue.
That's a very polite way of saying they're losing a ton of money.
Very polite. In practical terms, the true out-of-pocket cost to the university simply to field these teams is approximately $7.78 million.
Every single year.
Every single year. And as you mentioned in your opening scenario, the cost of doing business is not static.
Right, the 41% jump.
Yeah, that 41% jump in median expenses between 2015 and 2024, that wasn't driven by frivolous spending. It's a byproduct of severe inflationary pressures colliding with basically an arms race for talent.
I think we need to look closer at that arms race. Because when we hear about college sports expenses, our minds usually go to, massive football stadiums or multi-million-dollar coaching buyouts at the major Division I level.
Stuff you see on ESPN.
Exactly. But at the Division II level, the pressure points are entirely different, aren't they?
They are completely different and honestly, arguably much harder to manage. Division II schools are caught in this massive squeeze.
How so?
Well, they're facing the exact same rising costs for basic logistics like hotel rates, charter buses, commercial flights as the major programs.
Oh, right. A hotel room costs the same whether you're Alabama or a small D-tie school.
Exactly. For a rural school, just transporting 50 athletes 2 hours to the nearest regional airport is a massive line item on the budget.
It adds up so fast.
It does. Combine that with legislatively mandated increases for state employee salaries and, rising insurance premiums, and your baseline operating floor rises exponentially.
But unlike the massive Division I schools, they don't have the golden parachute.
No, these smaller programs are completely cut off from the media rights ecosystem. They do not receive those massive $50 million annual conference payouts from television networks to offset all that inflation.
So they are forced to spend like modern athletic programs, but they're basically earning like it's 1995.
That is exactly it.
Let's ground this in the specific reality of Winston-Salem State. Before this recent legislative shift, how did their balance sheet actually compare to that $9.2 million national median?
So according to WSSU Athletics Director Etienne Thomas, their historical operating budget has been hovering around just $3.5 million.
Wow. Only $3.5 million.
Yeah. It is an incredibly lean operation. I mean, they were competing nationally while operating at roughly a third of the median Division II expense level.
That raises a massive mechanical question for me. If the true cost of fielding a competitive program is nearly $8 million in negative net revenue, but WSSU is only working with $3.5 million, where is that $3.5 million even coming from?
Right, because they certainly aren't generating it through ticket sales alone.
Definitely not.
Well, this is where we return to your opening analogy about taxing the customers.
Ah, the students.
Yep. Smaller institutions within the UNC system keep their athletic departments afloat by relying heavily on mandatory student athletic fees.
Mandatory fees, okay.
At WSSU, they have been charging students $780 annually.
Just for athletics.
Just for athletics. And to be clear, that fee is not funding state-of-the-art recovery pools or luxury locker rooms. It is the absolute lifeblood of the department.
So it's paying for the basics.
Exactly. It pays for fundamental student scholarships, assistant coach salaries, and literally the diesel fuel for the team buses.
If you're a listener who has ever scrutinized a college tuition bill, you know exactly how frustrating those mandatory auxiliary fees can be.
Oh, absolutely. They sneak up on you.
They really do. You're taking out federal loans, you're paying interest on those loans, and nearly $800 of that debt every single year is being siphoned off just so the football team can afford a bus to an away game.
It's a tough pill to swallow.
It transforms the athletic deficit from just a sports problem into a systemic risk to the university's core educational mission.
Right, because at a certain point, the students can't afford it.
Exactly. There is a hard limit to how much debt you can load onto a 19-year-old student before it begins to negatively impact overall university enrollment.
And university chancellors across the state were acutely aware of that ceiling. Athletic directors were basically staring down a breaking point where they had to make impossible choices.
Like what kind of choices?
Either begin eliminating sports entirely, operating with skeletal coaching staffs, or the worst option, continue raising those fees on students who are already financially burdened.
So the model was basically buckling under its own weight, which sets the stage for a legislative intervention that completely rewrote the financial playbook.
The fairy godmother moment.
Yes, because in March 2024, North Carolina officially launched mobile sports wagering. We're talking about the legalization of betting via smartphone apps across the entire state.
A huge deal.
And the sheer volume of capital that materialized essentially overnight was staggering.
Staggering is definitely the right word. In less than a year, the state saw over $5.4 billion in total wagers and promotional funds flow through these platforms.
Over $5 billion. That's hard to even wrap your head around.
It is. Now, by law, the state of North Carolina levies an 18% tax on the gross revenues of those betting companies.
Okay, so a decent chunk of change.
Right. But what makes this uniquely transformative for college athletics is a very specific provision embedded in that legislation.
The distribution plan.
Exactly. The law mandated that a portion of that tax revenue be systematically distributed to 13 public universities across the state.
And it is really worth noting who was intentionally left off that list.
Yes, very important.
The legislation specifically excluded the state's biggest athletic powerhouses, UNC Chapel Hill and NC State.
Right.
And the logic there is purely economic. Those two universities reside in the Atlantic Coast Conference. They're already pulling in tens of millions of dollars annually from massive television contracts.
They don't need the bailout.
Exactly. This provision was designed as a targeted financial lifeline for the smaller athletic departments that were slowly drowning in the structural deficits we just outlined.
Spot on. And the initial projections for this tax distribution were incredibly conservative.
What were they expecting?
Athletic directors across these 13 schools were forecasting a modest bump, maybe a few $100,000 that they could use to patch a budget hole or cover a travel deficit.
Something helpful, but not life-changing.
Right. But reality vastly outperformed the modeling. In less than a year, each of those 13 universities received over $1.66 million.
Wow, that is a tectonic shift, going from hoping for a couple $100,000 to suddenly having $1.66 million deposited into your accounts.
And that is literally just the beginning.
Wait, there's more.
Oh, yeah. Moving forward, the UNC system estimates that these athletic departments will receive a minimum of $2 million annually in recurring revenue.
$2 million every year.
Yes. And on top of that, they are currently splitting a separate pool of $17 million in non-recurring state funds.
Okay, now before we look at how WSSU is actually spending this mountain of money, it is vital that we pause and look at the source of this capital impartially.
That's a very fair point.
Because the sources we're reviewing note that sports betting is a deeply complex and highly charged issue. Critics are legitimately concerned that legalizing mobile wagering, making it instantly accessible on a device that is always in your pocket, significantly increases the risk of problem gambling.
It's a real worry.
And one of the demographics most vulnerable to that specific type of addiction is college students. So there is an inherent tension here. How do these university administrations justify taking an influx of money generated by an industry that poses a direct risk to their own student body?
Well, what's fascinating here is that the UNC Board of Governors anticipated that exact ethical and financial tension.
They saw it coming.
They absolutely did. They understood that handing athletic directors a blank check funded by gambling taxes would be a public relations and administrative disaster.
It would look terrible.
It would. So they established incredibly strict guardrails. You can think of the Board of Governors mandate sort of like a corporate debt restructuring plan.
Okay, explain that.
They didn't hand out venture capital to go build flashy new stadiums. They handed out a targeted bailout specifically earmarked to buy down the students' tax burden.
So what are the actual mechanics of those guardrails? How is the money legally required to be deployed?
The mandate dictates 3 clear priorities. Priority 1. Universities must use the funds to address their existing athletic deficits. They have to stop the financial bleeding first and foremost.
Makes sense. Get out of the red.
Right. Priority 2. They must decrease their reliance on outside non-athletics revenues, meaning like institutional subsidies.
Stop pulling money from the academic side.
Exactly. And priority 3, which directly addresses the tension you mentioned, they must mitigate the rising costs of student fees.
Ah, the $780.
Yep. Across the UNC system, those mandatory athletic fees range from about $770 to $900 annually. The explicit goal here is to use the sports betting tax as a protective financial shield, basically shifting the burden of funding college athletics off the backs of students who are just trying to afford a degree.
That completely changes the strategic narrative. Instead of the university viewing this as like a slush fund to buy better uniforms, they are legally obligated to use it as a mechanism to lower the overall cost of attendance.
Exactly. It's a protective measure.
It is a fascinating application of tax law. But knowing those strict guidelines are in place, I want to look at exactly how Winston-Salem State is operate within them.
Let's do it.
Because when you dive into the statements from WSSU Athletics Director Etienne Thomas, she isn't just talking about survival or treading water. She is talking about aggressively leveling up.
Oh, she is executing a highly calculated master plan right now.
Tell me about the master plan.
Thomas is using a combination of the recurring sports betting revenue and those non-recurring state appropriations to completely overhaul the department's foundational infrastructure.
What are they building?
She outlined plans to upgrade the basketball venue, renovate the locker rooms, rebuild the tennis courts, and crucially, construct an athlete fueling station.
You know, here's where it gets really interesting, because when I hear master plan, my mind immediately defaults to 50,000-seat stadiums and luxury suites.
The big flashy stuff.
Right. But looking at Thomas's list about locker rooms, tennis courts, a fueling station that is the invisible foundational stuff.
It's the infrastructure.
Yeah, like a fueling station, for instance, isn't just a snack bar. In the modern NCAA, a fueling station is a highly regulated nutritional center designed to manage athlete caloric intake and physical recovery.
It's basically sports science.
Exactly. If you're a Division II school that doesn't have one, you are actively losing recruits to schools that do. It tells me they are building an operation designed for long-term retention, not just some short-term PR stunt.
And that is a crucial distinction. Thomas was very candid about the previous state of the department, noting that their goal now is to provide athletes with top-tier facilities rather than ones that are just, as she put it, patchwork together.
No more duct tape and a prayer.
Exactly. And her ambitions are not modest. She stated very clearly that her objective is for WSSU to become a Division II powerhouse, consistently ranking in the top 5 or top 10 nationally.
Wow, top 5 nationally.
Yeah. But to achieve that, she ran the financial models, and she estimated that WSSU needs an operating budget of about $7 million.
Okay, so she essentially needs to double their historical $3.5 million budget.
Double it, yeah.
That requires pulling in about $3 to $3.5 million annually from this new legislative tax distribution. Does the university's actual financial forecasting reflect that kind of massive leap?
The data absolutely confirms they are hitting that mark.
Really?
Yeah, if you review the newly proposed WSSU fiscal year 27 budget details, specifically looking at the auxiliary budgets, which encompasses the self-supporting entities like athletics. The athletics budget is now estimated at $7.5 million.
They didn't just meet the target, they overshot it.
They did.
They took a $3.5 million operation and transitioned its baseline to $7.5 million in a remarkably short window.
It's kind of like a Major League Baseball team suddenly waking up with a Major League operating budget.
Yes. But suddenly having $7.5 million creates a brand new, highly complex problem.
More money, more problems.
Literally. When any organization receives a sudden, massive influx of capital, the immediate risk is administrative bloat.
Oh, for sure.
If you don't have the right structural leadership in place, that windfall just vanishes into poorly structured contracts and inefficient spending. How does an institution ensure this tax money actually builds long-term equity?
Well, that is the multi-million-dollar challenge, because doubling a budget doesn't automatically double your win percentage.
I wish it did.
Right. It requires immense fiscal discipline, sophisticated forecasting, and an understanding of, like, multi-year capital depreciation.
You can't just wing it anymore.
No, you cannot operate like a scrappy grassroots department anymore. You are now managing a $7.5 million enterprise. And WSSU's recognition of that new reality perfectly explains our most recent and arguably most important administrative decision.
Which brings us to today's news. Today, April 24, 2026, Winston-Salem State officially named Eric Burns as their new director of athletics.
A huge hire.
Huge. And when you look at his resume, it is a glaring departure from the traditional profile of a college athletic director. He is not a former head coach who just, like, worked his way up through the fundraising ranks.
No, his background is highly specific to the exact financial complexities we've been unpacking today.
What's his background?
Burns has over 2 decades of higher education fiscal experience. Prior to this role, he served as WSSU's Chief Financial Officer and Deputy Athletics Director.
So he was the CFO.
Yes. And before that, he spent nearly 15 years at UNC Greensboro managing multi-million-dollar budgets, overseeing NCAA financial reporting compliance, and handling major capital projects.
See, hiring a former chief financial officer to run your athletic department is a massive strategic signal.
It really is.
Traditional athletic directors know how to rally alumni on game day. But a CFO knows how to manage debt service. They know how to structure coaching contracts with performance-based incentives that actually protect the university's bottom line.
Exactly.
WSSU realized that to manage this sports betting windfall effectively, they didn't need a traditional sports manager, they needed a financial architect.
And that strategic pivot is already yielding tangible returns. While Burns was just officially named the permanent AD today, he has actually been serving in an interim capacity since late 2025.
So he's had some time to make moves.
Right. During that interim tenure, he successfully managed the hiring of a new head football coach, Tori Woodbury, and a new men's basketball coach, Jay Butler. But more importantly, the financial stability he oversaw translated directly onto the court.
The on-field ROI is undeniable here. In February 2026, the Lady Rams captured their first ever basketball tournament title in the CIAA.
Huge milestone.
For those unfamiliar, the CIA, the Central Intercollegiate Athletic Association, is one of the most historic and competitive conferences in Division II.
So winning that is no small feat.
Not at all. Winning that title proves this financial strategy is already translating into real power. And just this month, in April 2026, the women's flag football team repeated as CIAA champions.
Back to back.
Yeah, they are taking this structural stability and turning it into actual hardware.
Which brings fascinating context to a statement made by WSSU Chancellor Bonita J. Brown regarding the hire.
What did she say?
When discussing why Burns was the absolute right choice for the permanent role, she specifically cited his ability to navigate the, and I'm quoting here, evolving NCAA landscape.
That phrase, evolving NCAA landscape, really crystallizes everything we've been discussing.
Then sums it all up.
It is a clear admission from the highest levels of university leadership that the game has fundamentally changed. College athletics is no longer simply an exercise in recruiting the fastest athletes or drawing up the most innovative plays.
No, it's way beyond that now.
It is, at its core, an exercise in high-level corporate finance. The institutions that will survive this chaotic new era are the ones that treat their athletic departments like sophisticated business units.
Absolutely.
Having a former CFO at the helm ensures that the sports betting windfall is treated as a strategic capital investment. It ensures that every dollar drawn from that 18% tax translates directly into sustainable growth, protected student fees, and championship contention.
It is a profound institutional turnaround. They have completely restructured their financial foundation.
Just to summarize the sheer scale of the journey WSSU has taken, we started by looking at a struggling program operating on a $3.5 million budget, an organization that was forced to charge its own students $780 a year just to keep the lights on.
Right. Battling a Division II economic landscape where the median operating deficit was nearly $8 million.
They were essentially operating on financial quicksand.
Completely sinking.
But then the legislative landscape shifted. Fueled by North Carolina's sports betting taxes, constrained by smart Board of Governors guardrails, and guided by a financially minded athletic director in Eric Burns, WSSU has completely rewritten its reality.
They really have.
They secured a $7.5 million proposed budget. They are upgrading their foundational facilities from being patchwork to professional grade. And they are bringing home historic conference championships.
Well, they took a legislative lifeline and are systematically building a Division II powerhouse.
It's a masterclass in leveraging a sudden windfall for long-term institutional equity.
I couldn't agree more.
It really is. But as we wrap up, it leaves us with a lingering provocative thought. So, what does this all mean? We started by imagining you were a CEO relying on a massive legislative shift to save your failing business model.
Right.
WSSU successfully navigated that shift through state-legalized sports betting. But if the survival, the infrastructure, and the on-field success of public university sports teams are now permanently tethered to the volume of sports bets placed by the public.
It's a risky tether.
It is. What happens to these student athletes and their tuition fees if the betting bubble ever bursts? Or if the political winds change and the legislation is reversed? Are we building a new era of college sports on a foundation of solid gold? Or simply riding out a really lucky roll of the dice? Well, something to consider next time you watch a game.